Our next speaker is Professor David Mosse. I personally remember reading Professor Mosse's writings, being influenced by it because of his entire analysis of Ambedkar and how he sort of locates him in anthropology. But since he's on sabbatical, it's really great to have him here, despite the fact that he's not around the university campus usually. Professor Mosse is of course Professor of Social Anthropology at head of the Department of Anthropology at SOAS. His research combines interest in anthropology of development and activism, environment history and natural resources management, in anthropology of Christianity, South Asian society, and popular religion. He has published extensively on the anthropology in the areas, and in particular of Dalit Bahujans, Ambedkar, and their social movements. Now I take this opportunity to invite Professor Mosse to please deliver the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those words. A couple of inaccuracies there. I've never actually written anything on Ambedkar, and I certainly don't consider myself to be a scholar of Ambedkar, as will probably become quite clear in a moment. But I'm really pleased to be able to speak here, and I'm speaking to the title that was given to me. Maybe we all were. So a bit like having been set an exam to write to the title. But I also see this as something of a celebratory event. And what I'm going to say is more celebratory than scholarly. We've had some very erudite and research-informed papers from political theory, from political economy. What I'm going to do is really recall some perhaps well-known themes from Ambedkar's life, and to do so with what many of us perhaps feel as an affection for this great man, and that you acquire through reading his work, and also seeing the impact and effect of him today. So it's a real honour to be able to support also the SOAS Dr Ambedkar Society in its early years, acknowledging the continuing, indeed increasing relevance of Baba Sahib Ambedkar to issues present today. Crisis was a word in the title I was given, Rethink Ambedkar as the Maker of Modern India and His Relevance in Today's Crisis. And crisis is perhaps one thing we can think about is the crisis of the huge inequality and extreme poverty, exploitation, social suffering and destitution amidst the growing wealth and accumulation that is characteristic of modern India. But we could also perhaps point to a moral crisis, which the papers are full of these days. That's to say, also an indifference to this other crisis of the privileged, to the material and other crises, as Harsh Munda points out in his recent book titled Looking Away. What's at issue isn't just indifference, but also the legitimation of discrimination and prejudice, and in fact indifference. You need not care. Whether that prejudice is located in relation to religion or caste or class or consumerism, and also a permitted intolerance to minorities. The gating that protects the middle class and the upper caste from adjacent poverty isn't just physical, it's also ideological and moral. And it's the discourse that enables the consolidation of economic and social ascendancy, especially of the urban, of the caste Hindu, of the middle upper classes, as well as the aspirations of those Modi has termed the neo-middle classes, that is perhaps here important. Some have just in the last few days connected the recent horrific rape cases to a crisis termed in the media a moral collapse, where extreme violence, instead of uniting a nation in human horror and disgust, highlights the religious and political divides that have allowed or encouraged sexual and sectarian violence. So the crisis is one of the erosion of pluralism and toleration, which are implications of the kind of indifference that I mentioned a minute ago. Both inequality and social suffering, or both inequality and social suffering and the moral and value frameworks that make this socially tolerable are precisely the focus of Ambedkar's life work. His simultaneous attention to the political, economic and legal, the social and the moral mark him out as a thinker of our times, acutely aware as he was of the threat that the prejudices of privilege were to the lives of the very poor, the migrants, the assetless, the forest-dwelling Adivasis, the Dalits, the Muslims, women and men. Ambedkar's thought is especially important today as we see societies divided between those who experience the continuing humiliation and discrimination of violence, including that of gender and minority status, but especially caste, and those who deny its reality or significance or want to silence public debate on an inhuman outrage, the fight against which Babasaheb Ambedkar devoted his entire life. Unlike Gandhi, who placed hope in change from within, an internal process of social and religious reform, Ambedkar well understood the need to lodge social protections in the Constitution and in law. As is well known, he created the foundation for progressive anti-discrimination social policy, built into the Constitution, a commitment to equality and recognition of historical disadvantage. But what's striking about Ambedkar is the moral basis of his thought and the inseparability of his thinking from his own life. He's important and relevant not just because of the clarity of his thought and social analysis, but because of his remarkable life and the way that that is remembered and communicated, and his struggles that speak so directly to many millions today. And I am no expert on Ambedkar's life and work, and there are many here who know much more than I probably ever will, and I certainly don't share his experience of caste in the way that others do. But what I can say is that I have been particularly struck by the life journey travelled by Dr. Ambedkar in his 65 years, from his birth on the 14th of April 1891 into a world of caste oppression and discrimination from which he rose to become one of the most highly educated men in India, brilliant thinker and statesman, as you'll all know, chair of the drafting committee of the Constitution, independent India's first law minister and foremost representative and advocate of the Dalits, to his death on the 6th of December 1956. And I can't really think of a life with parallel inspiration today worldwide. The almost equal period, 60 years or so from his death until today, during that period, Dr. Ambedkar has risen from an imposed obscurity immediately after his death to a towering figure of all India and international importance. Of course, we're celebrating him here because for millions, many millions of Dalits, Ambedkar is more than just a great leader. He embodies the capacity to overcome a lifetime of setbacks, the worst denigration of untouchability. It's often remarked, of course, that Mohandas Gandhi had to travel to South Africa to experience the horror of racist discrimination, but the young Bhimrao Ambedkar only had to go to his local school to experience discrimination on the basis of his inherited identity, to be avoided by touch, refused food, denied the learning of Sanskrit, insulted and physically abused, along with other members of his caste, for whom exclusion from temples or tanks was also routine. But it's not that his suffering consoles, but that his achievements inspire Dalit achievement in many fields despite oppression, including in India's universities, which have growing numbers of young, gifted, first-generation Dalit students, inspired by Dr. Ambedkar, with talent and ambition to be nurtured as vital to his envisioned democratic India, but whose thwarting and discrimination is too often a profound injury to that vision. After these introductory remarks, let me say something first about Ambedkar's social analysis and about inequality. Second, about his views on democracy, very briefly. And third, about his moral vision. So, his social analysis. First, perhaps because of my own training, I regard Ambedkar as an exemplary anthropologist, in the sense of a person who travels to another society in order to deeply immerse themselves in the culture, thought, and values of that society, grasping its essentials and seeing its flaws, as Dr. Ambedkar did in America and England, and then, on returning home, sees his own society with a new clarity and insight. For Babasaheb Ambedkar, this return with insight, as his writing testifies, was also a cruel reawakening to the reality of caste. But he uses the capacity to view caste from a distance, denaturalized, as an instance of a social order of inequality, to turn the pain and insult of reimposed discrimination into understanding, using his formidable intellect to free himself and then others from the grip of caste. Ambedkar, and this is the second point, therefore explains his adversity not as that of an individual man, but as manifestation of the working of a social system that, having millions of oppressed Dalits in its grip, is a system that has to be understood in its origins, the mechanisms that sustain it, and its underlying beliefs, as well as its effects, including deep psychological harms. Ambedkar understands individual suffering as social suffering. Third, in contrast to other political leaders of his time and since, he never let political vision distort his telling of the realities of life for the deprived. He constantly drew attention to the life as lived in Indian villages, the landlessness, the poverty, and power struggles, arguing that we can only make society as we would like it to be by first facing with honesty society as it is. Fourth, Ambedkar showed with breathtaking clarity that this society as it is looks different from the bottom than it does from the top. He was the first person to describe Indian society to the world from the perspective and in the voice of the downtrodden. His voice, from the experience of the Dalits, was a challenge to those who wanted to overlook the effects of caste. As such, he pointed in the direction of currently highly relevant streams of work on the way persisting social and economic structures of caste and discrimination shape the experience of millions, especially the poorest and women, but also Dalit entrepreneurs facing discrimination that harms their dignity as well as their businesses. And this reminds us of Ambedkar's writing on caste as a form of economic organization, with negative effects, whether on economic growth or on fair outcomes, including the issues of social separation, occupational division, graded and unequal rights, and enforcement through social sanctions, as he set out. Were there time, and there isn't, I could say a lot about recent research on caste and the post-liberalisation economy in India. The evidence suggests that effects of caste are not locational. They travel from village to city and into virtually all markets, turning proclaimed opportunities into sources of caste prejudice, of course mediated by class and gender in particular. Those drawn or pushed out of declining agriculture are sorted into work graded by skill, security, danger, or toxicity in caste-related ways. So Dalit workers in the garment industry are more often in the low-skilled, dirty dyeing units, and non-Dalits in the skilled tailoring parts. The gender divide allocating the worst work to Dalit women who carry the greatest burden of social degradation. Barbara Harris White's recent analysis of the informal waste economy of a Tamil town shows how the social cost of disposal of noxious waste is placed on undervalued humans. And this, of course, was Ambedkar's point, that, to quote him, caste is not just a division of labour, it's a division of labourers. Research by economists discovers both glass ceiling effects on Dalits in salaried employment and the sticky floor effects of self-employment. The economic success built on a massive expansion of private enterprise has certainly not dissolved caste. Dalit entrepreneurs find themselves closed in by discrimination, stuck in low-return sectors, in an economy in which markets are found to be caste ranked, such that Dalit business access is differentiated. Sectors such as mining or quarrying, construction and transport are found to be relatively open, while entry into health, education, food, hospitality and the service sectors is much harder. And where Dalits seek to hide their identity, especially where rivals leverage consumer discrimination against them. A Dalit woman supplying lunchboxes in Mumbai offices informs Asim Prakash, author of a book called Dalit Capital. She says, "There used to be a huge demand for the food I prepared. However, when the popularity of my food affected the business interests of Manjreka, an upper caste, he went and told everyone that I belonged to a lower caste. Thereafter, the demand for my food reduced by more than half." Ambedkar's understanding of caste as a social and economic organisation that creates inferiorised identities as part of a system of graded inequality, maintained, as he famously put it, through an ascending scale of reverence and a descending scale of contempt, is as relevant now as it was in his own time. Of course, there's no single process at work here, and no completely independent caste process from other processes, as Jens has pointed out. An emphasis on skills, experience and competence today have to some extent replaced the ascriptive characteristics and complementarities of caste. But at the same time, and sometimes in the same sites, caste, to quote, "caste persists and transforms itself as a regulative structure of the economy," as Barbara Harris White puts it. And as such, caste works not just as a structure of advantage or discrimination, which is how it is often understood, but also as a structure of advantage, a social structure of accumulation, in Harris White's phrase. Indeed, while its effects operate quite differently, often inversely, on upper castes and Dalits, modern caste persists in the age of the market because of its advantages. Its discriminations are opportunities for others, even though constitutionally and legally, caste is only a source of disadvantage and never a source of privilege. There's a relative silence, in fact, on caste economics as against caste politics. I was quite interested in what Shruti was saying about Ambedkar's project to bring caste out into explicit agonistic competition in the realm of politics. And I think one could say that that agonistic overt contest in politics allows for the hidden processes of caste to continue in the realm of economics, where there is not explicit and open discussion of caste, particularly given prevailing ideas about the market economy and its counter to the very existence of caste. Until recently, until the recent research, that is, on caste in the economy, one could say almost that caste has been enclosed in religion and in politics, being, for example, restricted to the issue of reservations in relation to politics, a kind of caste abatement, as Niraja Jael suggests, offering political recognition to Dalits, but also OBCs particularly, but avoiding economic redistribution, effectively protecting elite class caste interests now reoriented to private business. How caste is kept in politics and out of economics points to the upper caste, middle class politics of caste refusal. What we hear from the experience of privileged groups is that in a world of merit, globalization and free market capitalism, identities of caste, ethnicity, race, or even gender are irrelevant. Caste identity can be overridden by modern professional identities. But what we've learnt, of course, from the experience of many Dalits is very different. Their caste identity seems to be indelible and harshly engraved. It overwrites all other identities. Even in the marketplace, inequality of opportunity distorts the world of merit. Most crucially, Ambedkar retained a structural perspective. He understood that the experience of poverty is not about individual circumstances, but it's the result of the power of the social order over the identity and status of an entire social group or category. He anticipates contemporary ideas on categorical exclusion from people like Charles Tilly. But he also warns against presently pervasive approaches to poverty reduction. Dalits will not be uplifted, Ambedkar insists, through schemes targeted at self-improvement, intended to make individuals educated or virtuous. And Ambedkar strongly disagreed with the Hindu-led Anti-Untouchability League on this. What's needed, Ambedkar insisted, is, quote, to raise the civil rights of the whole class to a higher level. And we see, I think, the continuing relevance of this today. But his interest wasn't in groups per se, but in the underlying social system that created marginalized identities, especially, of course, of Dalits, and that produced their disabilities, including casteist ideas and ideologies that make inequality acceptable and even right. In his famous study of the Shudras, Ambedkar said that, quote, the point of interest is not the Shudras as a people, but the legal system of pains and penalties to which they're subjected, originally devised by Brahmins. Ambedkar didn't want to set the interests of this group against that group, far from it. From his earliest writings on caste, he insisted on the cultural unity of India and resisted the idea of an Aryan-Dravidian divide, for example, or other separations. His writing tells us something else of present relevance, namely that the underlying social system has various disguises, and the attitude of exclusion doesn't always appear in the same outward register. It can take new forms, perhaps in relation to where people can live, which housing colonies, what networks they can belong to, controlled through marriage, what work they can do, which trades or markets or careers they can enter without obstacles. And this is of utmost importance as claims are made about the erasure of caste by conditions of modernity, which are seen to weaken certain public ritual hierarchies, but the weakening of those hierarchies doesn't mean the erasure of caste in all its other dimensions. What I've learnt from research is that today, yes, modern capitalism does weaken or dissolve some forms of caste barriers, allows some escape, and Dr. Ambedkar was right about rational secular progress, but at the same time, modern capitalism also allows the assertion of new forms of discrimination. And Dr. Ambedkar was right about the underlying social structure manifest always in new guises. Today, understanding of and attention to oppressive systems is distorted by a contemporary arrangement of categories that distinguishes the religious from politics and the market economy, or tradition and modernity. Ambedkar's analysis is striking in its refusal of such boundaries. Of course, he refused to allow caste to be treated as a religious matter, separate from society and economy. It's well known how critical Ambedkar was of the Hindu scriptural sanction of caste and varna, but he rejected the idea that untouchability was just a cultural or religious matter. He was rightly offended when the British colonial government refused to address what were clearly civic disabilities, such as Dalit children being refused entry to school, on the grounds that they, the government, could not intervene in matters of cultural or religious tradition. Ambedkar proclaimed that Dalits held civic rights and the universal right to equal treatment. And so he was equally offended by reformers who felt that welfare work for Dalits was, as Mahatma Gandhi put it, quote, a penance which the Hindus have to do for the sin of untouchability. It's equally clear that Ambedkar's analysis doesn't separate social inequality from economic inequality or caste from class, notwithstanding what Jens has told us about the relationship, complex and historically changing, between the Communist Party and Ambedkar. But as Jens also mentioned, Ambedkar was the only person in his time to link the rights of the oppressed classes and the rights of Dalits in the formation of the Independent Labour Party. So Ambedkar's anthropology is as penetrating and relevant as ever in ensuring alertness to new forms of exclusion that parallel earlier forms or forms of untouchability. And the experience of Dalits, especially, given that their opportunities in modern society are still determined by underlying judgments about their worth and value. And that economic progress that claims equal treatment and self-respect, or their claims to equal treatment and self-respect, are often rejected, or at worst, that these provoke terrifying violent attacks. Recently, research was published by Sharma et al., based on a decade's crime data from 2001 to 10, that correlated the rise in violent attacks on Dalits with a narrowing of the gap between the standard of living between dominant castes and Dalits. So I've noted ways in which Dr. Ambedkar can perhaps shape and influence some of the challenges that are faced today. Policymakers might need squarely to face the social realities of continuing inequality, discrimination and marginalisation of certain groups in society, the discrimination and the marginalisation they face. Second, they need to listen to the experience of these groups themselves and make their concerns part of national priorities. And third, they need to understand that the conditions of the marginalised and exploited are not just the result of their individual capacities, but the working of social systems that allow discrimination and exclusion of certain categories of people. And Dr. Ambedkar, of course, points to caste as one such system, not only in India, but internationally. I intended to say something about Ambedkar's thoughts on democracy, and he is one of India's greatest thinkers on the subject, but there isn't much time. So I'll just say some very, very short comments. First, to say he was certainly a realist about the social order and its effects, as we've heard, but he was also an optimist about the power of democratic institutions to bring about equality. And perhaps I can just briefly point to some of the contradictions and constraints he points to in democracy's core principles. Liberty, which takes us to the heart of what we normally understand by parliamentary democracy. Equality, which forces us to bring economic matters into what it means to be free, that's to say free from want as well. And fraternity, which turns us towards Ambedkar's thinking on social morality and religion. Ambedkar, of course, insisted that political freedom is of limited value without social freedom. And in the absence of economic democracy, that's to say freedom of opportunity, political democracy would be under threat. With remarkable foresight into our own times, he saw how democracy could be undermined by hollow hero worship, as he puts it, promoted by the press, or by the influence of, quote, big business and money magnates. For the first time in our country, he said in 1943, money is taking the field as an organised power. We probably all know his famous words on the 26th of January 1950, we're going to enter into a life of contradiction. In politics, we'll have equality, and in the social and economic life, we will have inequality. In politics, we will be recognizing the principle of one man, one vote, and one vote, one value. In our social and economic life, we shall, by reason of our social and economic structure, continue to deny the principle of one man, one value. How long shall we continue to live this life of contradictions? How long shall we continue to deny equality in our social and economic life? If we continue to deny it for long, we will do so only by putting our political democracy in peril. End quote. Equality was the deeper and more embracing problem with which Ambedkar grappled. Democracy is another name for equality, he wrote. And he was deeply concerned that freedom might not bring equality, but instead the freedom to exploit. To quote him again, parliamentary democracy took no notice of economic inequalities and did not mind if freedom of contract gave the strong the opportunity to defraud the weak. The result is that parliamentary democracy, in standing out as a protagonist of liberty, has continuously added to the economic wrongs of the poor, the downtrodden, and the disinherited class. End quote. And Ambedkar speaks thus with clarity and force to the neoliberal conditions of our time and the social harms produced by political commitment to market freedom that reduces social protection or casualizes labour and increases inequality and conflict. As to fraternity, he said, quote, "Without fraternity, equality and liberty will be no deeper than coats of paint. Fraternity means that democracy is built on people as members of a social group. Fraternity is about practice, life with others," I think was what Shruti said. That's to say, social interactions. It's about kinship and belonging. For the Dalits, Ambedkar wrote, quote, "Mere citizenship is not enough to put an end to their isolation and troubles. Fraternity reaches beyond politics. The bond of kinship is the, as he put it, only cure. And for Ambedkar, true kinship was grounded in true religion, the basis of common humanity. Politics and law were not, in the end and in themselves, enough." Dr Ambedkar wrote in 1943, quote, "Rights are protected not by law, but by the social and moral conscience of society." And then separately, "A right which is guaranteed by law but is opposed to by society is of no use at all." So it was a transformation of social conscience, as he put it, for which he struggled. That is, as a, quote, "social organization free from rigid social barriers, founded on," as he put it, "an attitude of respect towards their fellows." For this transformation, he said, religion was very necessary. Religion not as personal belief or doctrine, but as the conservation and consecration of social life, to quote him. So we come to Baba Saheb's moment of conversion in October 1956 to Buddhism. 2 years ago, on the 13th and 14th of April, I was privileged to speak to a large gathering of Ambedkar's followers, Ambedkarites and Buddhists, at the Diksha Bhumi in Nagpur, the place of his conversion. And I was profoundly moved to be part of the mass celebration that took over the Nagpur streets throughout the night and over the following burning hot days. I realized very clearly that Ambedkar converted to Buddhism not as an individual, but as a collective act, with many hundreds of thousands of other Dalits. And he didn't convert to Buddhism to worship different gods, or any god, in fact, but to Buddhism as a religion that universalized the values of human life, and to embrace an idea of humanity beyond the social order, as a member of a social category that had been dehumanized in that social order, which denied them the right to have rights. Conversion to Buddhism would erase the mark of caste that remained indelible even within political emancipation. Baba Saheb's conversion to Buddhism followed from, and only makes sense really in terms of his long life struggle to expose caste as an unjust social order, as a fundamental fact of history and of power, generating inequality and restricting opportunity, that had to be challenged through public action, social policy and law. Even when in the end he saw that politics and law were not enough to bring about the transformation of society, it was this view of caste as the underlying order to be defeated that shaped his deeper vision of emancipation. Experience proves, he wrote in 1943, rights, as I said, are protected not by law, but by the social and moral conscience of society. It's this legacy that is perhaps crucial in India today, and not only in India, but much more widely. Ultimately, Ambedkar points not to the splitting away from others in society, but rather embracing a universal humanity and a wider community. As he put it, the touchables and the untouchables cannot be held together by law, certainly not by any electoral law, substituting joint electorates for separate electorates. The only thing that can hold them together is love. Outside the family, justice alone, in my opinion, can open the possibility of love. Thank you.